Captain Sarah Chen stood outside the gray concrete building at Fort Davidson, a military detention facility in rural Virginia. The October wind pulled at her uniform, but she kept her shoulders straight and her chin level. She'd learned a long time ago that posture mattered when people were already looking for reasons to dismiss you. She was 32 years old, slim but strong, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her uniform was crisp and correct, but there was something missing from it that everyone noticed right away. No combat action badge above her name tape, no deployment patches, no visible proof that she'd ever been in harm's way. "Morning, Captain," said Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb as she entered the facility. His tone was polite but empty. He was a thick-shouldered man in his 40s with 3 deployment patches and a chest full of medals. He'd made it clear from day one that he didn't think much of officers who'd never seen combat. "Morning, Sergeant Webb," Sarah replied evenly. She walked past him toward her small office in the back corner of the administrative wing. Behind her, she heard the low murmur of voices. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. The same things they'd been saying for the 6 months since she'd arrived. Desk officer. Paper pusher. She's never been outside the wire, it was true. Sarah had never deployed to a combat zone. She'd served her entire career in military intelligence, linguistics, and psychological operations. She spoke 4 languages fluently. She had a master's degree in behavioral psychology. She'd spent years studying interrogation techniques, cultural communication, and crisis negotiation. But none of that seemed to matter here. Here, at Fort Davidson, the only currency that mattered was combat experience. The soldiers who worked detention operations were almost all infantry veterans who'd served multiple tours in Iraq or Afghanistan. They'd seen things, done things, survived things, and they looked at Sarah like she was a child playing dress-up. The facility housed approximately 40 detainees at any given time. These were not ordinary prisoners. They were high-value individuals captured during ongoing operations overseas. Enemy combatants, suspected terrorists, people with information that could save American lives. Sarah's official role was Detainee Affairs Officer. She was supposed to oversee living conditions, ensure compliance with international law, and coordinate interrogation schedules. It was an important job. A job that required intelligence and care. But to most of the soldiers here, it was a job for someone who couldn't handle the real work. The real work, in their eyes, was done by the interrogators. Hard men like Chief Warrant Officer Dan Kovach, who led the interrogation team. Kovach was a legend in certain circles. 3 combat tours, fluent in Arabic and Pashto. He had a reputation for getting results. He also had a reputation for breaking the rules. Sarah had only been at Fort Davidson for a week when she'd first raised concerns about Kovach's methods. She'd reviewed recordings of interrogation sessions. What she'd heard had troubled her deeply. Threats, intimidation, techniques that walked a dangerous line. She'd written a carefully worded memo to the facility commander. Colonel Raymond Price. Colonel Price had called her into his office the next day. "Captain Chen," he'd said, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. "I understand you have concerns about Chief Kovach's interrogation methods." "Yes, sir. Some of the approaches seem inconsistent with—" "Let me stop you right there." The colonel's voice wasn't loud, but it was hard. "Chief Kovach has extracted intelligence that has saved American lives. Real lives. Soldiers in the field. He knows what he's doing." "I understand that, sir, but do you?" Colonel Price had leaned forward then, his eyes sharp. "Have you ever been in a situation where the information you needed could mean the difference between your friends living or dying? Have you ever had to make those calls?" Sarah had felt the heat rise in her face. "No, sir. But the regulations were written by people in Washington who've never been shot at. Chief Kovach has been in the field. He understands what's at stake." The colonel had paused, then softened his tone slightly. "Look, Captain, I appreciate your attention to detail, but you need to understand how things work here. These detainees aren't tourists who got lost. They're enemy combatants. They have blood on their hands. And if we can get information from them that saves even one American life, then we've done our job." Sarah had left that meeting understanding exactly where she stood. Over the following months, she'd done her job quietly and thoroughly. She'd ensured the detainees received proper medical care. She'd maintained meticulous records. She'd coordinated with the Red Cross inspectors and made sure the facility met every legal requirement. And she'd been invisible. The interrogators barely acknowledged her. The guards treated her politely but distantly. Even the administrative staff seemed to see her as temporary, forgettable. But Sarah had been doing something else too. Something no one had asked her to do. She'd been watching, listening, learning. She'd studied each detainee's file carefully, their backgrounds, their families, their villages and tribes and histories. She'd listened to recordings of their interrogation sessions, not just to monitor for violations, but to understand their speech patterns, their fears, their values. She'd learned their names, their real names, not just the numbers they were assigned. And sometimes when she did her rounds through the detention wing, she'd greet them in their own languages. A simple good morning in Pashto, a respectful nod. A moment of basic human acknowledgement. The other soldiers thought she was wasting her time, or worse, being soft. But Sarah was playing a longer game. She knew something that the hard men with their combat badges didn't seem to understand. She knew that people were more than the worst thing they'd ever done, that even enemies were human, and that sometimes the path to the truth wasn't through fear and intimidation. Sometimes it was through the smallest gesture of respect. But she'd kept these thoughts to herself. She'd stayed quiet, done her job, and waited. She didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The facility was about to face a crisis unlike anything it had seen before, and when it came, all those combat veterans with their badges and medals would discover something they'd never expected. The only person who could help them was the quiet captain they'd spent 6 months dismissing. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning in late November. Sarah was in her office reviewing medical reports when she heard raised voices in the hallway. She looked up to see Colonel Price striding past with Chief Kovacs and 2 other senior interrogators. Their faces were tense. Something was wrong. She stood and stepped into the hallway. "Sir, is everything all right?" Colonel Price paused, clearly debating whether to include her. Finally, he gestured toward the conference room. "You should probably hear this. It affects your area." Sarah followed them into the room. On the screen at the far end was a secure video feed from the Pentagon. A stern-looking Army general was speaking. "Received credible intelligence in the last 48 hours, the general was saying. "We have strong reason to believe that at least one of the detainees currently in your facility has direct knowledge of an imminent attack planned against U.S. forces in the region. We're talking about a potential mass casualty event." The room went silent. "What kind of attack, sir?" Colonel Price asked. "Details are limited, but our sources indicate it involves a coordinated assault on forward operating base Sandstone. That base currently houses approximately 200 personnel." The general's face was grave. "If this attack succeeds, we could be looking at significant American casualties. Your facility has 3 detainees who were captured in the same tribal area where the intelligence originated. We need to know what they know, and we need to know it in the next 72 hours. After the video call ended, Colonel Price turned to Chief Kovacs. "You heard the man. Whatever it takes," Kovacs nodded slowly. "We'll start immediately. Round-the-clock sessions. Full pressure." Sarah felt a chill run through her. She knew what full pressure meant in Kovacs' vocabulary. Over the next 2 days, the facility became a pressure cooker. The 3 detainees, a former Taliban commander named Ahmadi, a suspected bomb maker called Rashid, and a younger man named Khalid who'd been captured during a raid, were interrogated continuously. Teams rotated every 6 hours. The sessions were intense, aggressive, unrelenting, and they produced nothing. Ahmadi, the Taliban commander, was a hard man who'd been through interrogations before. He sat in stony silence, occasionally offering a contemptuous smile. Rashid, the bomb maker, responded to every question with religious quotations and defiance. And Khalid, the youngest, seemed to retreat further into himself with each session, becoming less responsive rather than more. By Thursday afternoon, tension in the facility was reaching a breaking point. Sarah had spent the 2 days doing what she always did, staying out of the way, monitoring conditions, making sure procedures were followed. But she'd also been watching the interrogation recordings late into the night, and what she saw troubled her deeply. The interrogators were frustrated, and frustrated interrogators made mistakes. She saw Kovac leaning close to Ahmadi, his voice low and threatening. She saw another interrogator slam his hand on the table in front of Rashid, making the smaller man flinch. She saw Khalid sitting with his head down, completely shut down, not even responding to his own name. This wasn't working, and Sarah knew why. She'd spent 6 months studying these men and others like them. She understood something about their culture, their honor code, their psychology. The more aggressively they were pushed, the more they would resist. It wasn't about the information anymore. It was about not being broken. On Thursday evening, Sarah did something she'd never done before. She requested a meeting with Colonel Price. His assistant made her wait 20 minutes before ushering her in. The colonel looked exhausted. His eyes were red-rimmed and there was a coffee stain on his uniform shirt. "Captain Chen, I'm extremely busy right now." "I know, sir. I'll be brief." Sarah had rehearsed this on the walk over. "I've been reviewing the interrogation sessions with the 3 priority detainees. And? They're not going to break. Not with the current approach." Colonel Price's expression hardened. "Chief Kovac is the most experienced interrogator in this command. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that there might be another way." Sarah kept her voice steady. "These men come from a tribal culture where honor and respect are paramount. The harder we push, the more they feel obligated to resist. It becomes a matter of pride. So what do you propose? That we ask them nicely?" The colonel's tone was mocking. Sarah felt the familiar heat of dismissal, but she pushed through it. "I'd like to try a different approach. With your permission, I'd like to spend time with them. Not interrogation, just conversation." The colonel stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. "Captain, we have 72 hours to prevent a potential massacre of American soldiers. You want to have conversations?" "Sir, I speak their languages. I've studied their culture. You've been sitting in an office." Colonel Price stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "I appreciate your initiative, Captain. I really do. But this is a job for professionals, for people who understand what's at stake, people who've been in the field." "Sir, that's all, Captain. Dismissed." Sarah walked back to her office, feeling the weight of failure. She'd known it was a long shot. But she'd had to try. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the 3 detainees, about the soldiers at Forward Operating Base Sandstone who had no idea they were in danger, about the ticking clock. At 2 in the morning, she got dressed and drove back to the facility. The night shift was minimal, just a few guards and 1 interrogator who was taking a break between sessions. Sarah signed in and told the guard she needed to check on something in the detention wing. No one questioned her. After all, she was the detainee affairs officer. It was her job to monitor the facility. She walked slowly through the wing. Most of the detainees were asleep. But when she reached Khalid's cell, she saw he was awake, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. He was the youngest of the 3 priority detainees, maybe 25 years old. His file said he'd been a teacher before the war. Sarah stopped at his cell. For a moment, she just stood there. Then in Pashto, she spoke quietly. "You're not sleeping." Khalid's head jerked up. His eyes widened in surprise. None of the interrogators spoke to him in his own language. They used translators. "The nights are long here," Sarah continued in Pashto. "I imagine you must miss home." Khalid stared at her. She could see the confusion and suspicion in his face. "I'm not here to interrogate you," Sarah said. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." She waited. Khalid said nothing. Sarah nodded respectfully and turned to walk away. "You speak well," Khalid said suddenly in Pashto. His voice was hoarse from disuse. Sarah turned back. "Thank you. I studied for many years. Why? Because I wanted to understand." She paused. "I wanted to understand people whose lives were different from mine." Khalid looked at her for a long moment. Then he lowered his eyes. Sarah stayed there for a few more moments, then continued her rounds. It wasn't much, just a brief exchange, but it was something. The next morning, when Chief Kovac found out that Sarah had been in the detention wing in the middle of the night, he went straight to Colonel Price. "She's interfering," Kovac said flatly. "She's undermining the interrogation process." Sarah was called into the colonel's office for the second time in 24 hours. This time Kovac was there too, his arms crossed, his face angry. "Captain Chen," Colonel Price said heavily, "I'm going to ask you directly. Did you speak with detainee Khalid last night?" Sarah met his eyes. Yes, sir. Without authorization? Without an interrogator present? I was performing my duties as detainee affairs officer, sir. I was checking on the welfare of— Bullshit, Kovac interrupted. You were trying to play interrogator, and you have no idea what you're doing. Chief Kovac, Sarah said, turning to face him directly. With respect, your methods aren't working. We have less than 48 hours left, and— My methods have worked for 15 years, Kovac shot back. I've gotten intelligence that saved lives. What have you done? What have you accomplished besides pushing papers and second-guessing people who actually know what they're doing? The words hit like a slap. Sarah felt her face flush. Colonel Price held up a hand. That's enough. Both of you. He looked at Sarah. Captain, I'm issuing a direct order. You are not to interact with any of the 3 priority detainees. Is that clear? Sarah's throat was tight. Sir, I truly believe— Is that clear, Captain? The silence stretched out. Yes, sir, Sarah finally said. It's clear. She left the office feeling hollow, but she'd seen something in Khalid's eyes during that brief conversation. Something the interrogators hadn't been able to reach. She'd seen a human being who was tired of being treated like an animal, and she absolutely knew, that if given the chance, she could reach him. The question was whether she'd get that chance before time ran out. Friday afternoon brought a cold rain to Fort Davidson. Sarah watched it through her office window, feeling as gray as the sky. 48 hours had become 24 hours. The facility was running on stress and caffeine. Interrogation sessions continued without pause. She'd seen the recordings. Kovac and his team were getting more aggressive, more desperate. The detainees were shutting down completely. Ahmadi, the Taliban commander, now sat in complete silence, his eyes distant. Rashid, the bomb maker, had started rocking back and forth, muttering prayers. And Khalid had stopped responding entirely. He simply sat with his head down, unreachable. At 3 o'clock, Sarah received an email summoning all senior staff to the conference room. When she arrived, the atmosphere was funereal. Colonel Price stood at the head of the table, his face drawn. I just got off a call with the Pentagon. They're evacuating Forward Operating Base Sandstone. 200 personnel being relocated within the next 12 hours. That's a victory, isn't it? Someone asked. If they evacuate, the attack fails. The attack gets delayed, Kovac corrected harshly. These people are patient. They'll just wait until the base is reoccupied and hit it then. Or they'll redirect to a different target. Meanwhile, we've shown that we can be scared into abandoning our positions. Colonel Price nodded slowly. The evacuation is a temporary measure. But the general made it clear. This facility has failed in its mission. We had high-value detainees with critical intelligence, and we couldn't extract it. His eyes moved around the room. There will be an investigation. There will be consequences. The meeting adjourned in silence. Sarah walked back to her office in a daze. This wasn't just about careers or reprimands. This was about soldiers whose lives would remain in danger. About an enemy who would feel emboldened. About a failure that could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. She sat at her desk and pulled up Khalid's file for what must have been the 100th time. Khalid Ahmadzai. Age 26. Former school teacher in a small village. No confirmed combat activity, but captured during a raid on a compound where weapons were found. He'd been detained for 8 months, 8 months away from his family, his home, his life. She clicked through to his intake photos. A thin young man with intelligent eyes and a guarded expression. Then she pulled up his recent interrogation recordings. She watched as Kovac leaned across the table. Tell us about the attack. We know you know. We know your cousin is involved in the planning. Khalid sat motionless. You think this is about loyalty? Your people don't care about you. You're expendable to them. No response. You're going to sit in this cell for the rest of your life. Is that what you want? You'll never see your family again, never go home, all because you're protecting people who would throw you away like garbage. Khalid's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sarah closed the video. Her hands were trembling. She looked at the clock. It was 5:30 in the evening. Outside, the rain continued to fall. In less than 24 hours, the window would close completely. Sarah made a decision. She knew it could end her career. She knew it was direct disobedience of a lawful order. But she also knew it was the right thing to do. She waited until 7 o'clock, when the shift change would create maximum confusion. Then she walked to the detention wing. The guard at the desk was a young specialist named Morrison. Sarah had always treated him with respect, learned his name, asked about his family. "Evening, Specialist Morrison," she said calmly. "Evening, ma'am. I need to do a welfare check on the priority detainees. Just a quick visual confirmation for my report to the colonel." Morrison hesitated. "Ma'am, I thought Chief Kovacs said—" "The chief said no interrogations," Sarah said smoothly. "This is just a welfare check. 2 minutes, you can watch me the whole time if you'd like." Morrison wavered, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah walked into the detention wing. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her expression calm. She stopped at Khalid's cell. He was sitting, on the floor, his head resting against the wall, his eyes closed. He looked exhausted. "Khalid," she said softly in Pashto. His eyes opened. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "I need to tell you something," Sarah continued in Pashto. "And I need you to listen." Khalid sat up slowly. "I know you're tired. I know you've been treated badly. I know you feel that your only power is to resist." Sarah kept her voice low and steady. "But I also know you're not like the others. I read your file. You were a teacher. You taught children. That tells me something about who you are." Khalid's eyes were locked on hers now. "There's going to be an attack," Sarah said. "People are going to die. Maybe people on your side, maybe people on mine. Probably both." She paused. "The interrogators here think the only way to get information is through fear and force. They think that's all you understand. But I don't believe that." "What do you believe?" Khalid asked quietly in Pashto. It was the first real question he'd asked in days. "I believe you're a good man caught in a terrible situation," Sarah said. "I believe you have information that could save lives. And I believe that deep down, you don't want innocent people to die any more than I do." Khalid looked away. "You don't understand our world." "Maybe not. But I understand that mothers cry the same in every language when they lose their children. I understand that death is still death, whether it comes from an American bomb or a Taliban bullet." Khalid was quiet for a long moment. "Why should I trust you?" he finally asked. "Because in 6 months I'm the only person in this facility who's treated you like a human being," Sarah said simply. "I'm the only one who learned your name instead of just calling you a number. The only one who speaks to you in your language with respect." She could see the conflict in his face. "I can't promise you'll be released," Sarah continued. "I can't promise any reward. All I can promise is that if you help me, I will do everything in my power to make sure you're treated fairly, that your family will know you're alive, that your story will be heard." "My story doesn't matter," Khalid said bitterly. "It matters to me." The words hung in the air between them. Khalid closed his eyes. Sarah could see him struggling with something internal, some calculation she couldn't fully understand. "Captain Chen!" The voice made Sarah jump. She turned to see Chief Kovacs striding down the corridor, his face furious. "Step away from that cell right now." Sarah didn't move. "Chief Kovacs, I'm in the middle of—" "You're in the middle of disobeying a direct order." Kovacs grabbed her arm. "You're done here." As Kovacs pulled her away, Sarah looked back at Khalid. Their eyes met for one brief moment. Then she was being marched down the corridor and out of the detention wing. Colonel Price was called in. This time, there was no discussion, no debate. "Captain Chen, you have willfully and deliberately disobeyed a direct order," the colonel said, his voice like ice. "You've compromised an ongoing interrogation operation. I'm suspending you from duty effective immediately. You're to surrender your facility credentials and leave the premises." A formal court-martial proceeding will be initiated on Monday. Sarah felt numb. Sir, I was just trying to... I don't want to hear it, Captain. You're dismissed. Sarah walked to her office in a daze. She packed her few personal items into a box. Her credentials, her notebook, a photo of her parents. It was over. Her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for. As she walked toward the exit carrying her box of belongings, she passed a window that looked into the facility's operations center. Through the glass, she could see Kovac and his team preparing for another interrogation session. The same failed approach, the same dead end. She pushed through the front door into the cold November rain. She'd tried, she'd failed, and somewhere, a clock was still ticking down. Sarah drove home through the rain, her hands tight on the wheel, her mind a storm of regret and anger and stubborn certainty that she'd been right, even if it had cost her everything. Her apartment was small and neat, a second-floor unit in a quiet complex about 20 minutes from Fort Davidson. She climbed the stairs slowly, feeling like each step took enormous effort. Inside, she set down her box of belongings and stood in the dark living room, not bothering to turn on the lights. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Finally, she looked at it. 12 missed calls, all from the same number at Fort Davidson. Before she could process what that meant, her phone rang again. She answered. Captain Chen. Ma'am, this is Specialist Morrison. From the detention wing. The young man's voice was urgent. Ma'am, you need to come back. Right now, Sarah's heart skipped. Morrison, I've been suspended. I can't, ma'am, it's the detainee. Khalid, after they took you away. He has to speak to you, only you. He says he'll talk, but only to the woman who speaks Pashto. Only to you. Sarah stood frozen in her dark apartment. Colonel Price tried to have Chief Kovac talk to him, but Khalid just shut down again. Morrison continued rapidly. The colonel is asking. No, he's ordering you to come back. Right now. Ma'am, I think he's actually going to talk. 20 minutes later, Sarah was back at Fort Davidson. Her visitor badge clipped to her civilian jacket because her credentials had been surrendered. Colonel Price met her at the entrance. His face was haggard, but his eyes were intense. I don't know what you said to him, the colonel said without preamble, but he's asking for you. Only you. Sir, I thought I was being court-martialed. If this doesn't work, you still are, Colonel Price said bluntly. But right now you're our only option. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to talk to him. Chief Kovac and I will observe from the monitoring room. If you get anything at all about this attack, you relay it immediately. Understood? Yes, sir. And Captain? The colonel's voice softened slightly. For what it's worth. I hope you're right about this. They walked to the interrogation room. Through the window, Sarah could see Khalid sitting at the metal table, his hands folded in front of him. He looked small and tired. Sarah took a breath and entered the room. Khalid looked up. When he saw her, something in his expression shifted. Not quite relief, not quite trust, but something. Salam alaikum, Sarah said quietly in Pashto, the traditional greeting. Peace be upon you. Wa alaikum salam, Khalid replied automatically. And upon you, peace. Sarah sat down across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. They told me you asked to speak with me, Sarah said in Pashto. I did. Why? Khalid looked at his hands. Because you asked me a question once. You asked if I missed home. No one else has asked me that. Everyone else asks what I know, what I did, who I worked with. But you asked if I missed home. Sarah waited. I do miss it, Khalid said quietly. Every day, every moment. I miss my mother's cooking. I miss teaching the children. I miss walking in the mountains. His voice cracked slightly. I miss being a person instead of a number in a cell. I know, Sarah said softly. When you spoke to me tonight, you said I was a good man caught in a terrible situation. Khalid finally looked up at her. Do you really believe that? Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. I do. Khalid's eyes were wet. The others here, they think I am evil. They think I want to kill Americans. They think I am a monster. Are you? Sarah asked gently. No. The word was fierce. I am a teacher. I taught mathematics and poetry. I never hurt anyone. Then why were you at that compound? The one where they found weapons? Khalid closed his eyes. My cousin, he is involved with the Taliban. I didn't know how deeply until it was too late. He asked me to deliver a message to a house. Just a message, he said. When I arrived, there were men there, fighters. I tried to leave, but then your soldiers came, the raid. I was just there. Wrong place, wrong time. Sarah listened carefully, her instincts telling her this was truth. And the attack? She asked quietly. The one they keep asking you about? Khalid's hands tightened. This was the moment. Everything hung in the balance. I don't know the details, he said finally. I am not part of the planning. I am not a fighter. Sarah felt disappointment flood through her, but she kept her face neutral. But, Khalid continued, I heard things. That night at the compound before the raid, the men were talking. They didn't think I was listening or they didn't care. Sarah leaned forward slightly. What did they say? They talked about an attack. A big one. They said it would be at the American base, the one they call Sandstone. But, Khalid hesitated. But what? They said the base was not the real target. It was, what is the word? A misdirection. To make Americans move soldiers to defend Sandstone, while the real attack happened somewhere else. Sarah felt ice run through her veins. Somewhere else? Where? A convoy. A supply convoy that runs every week between two bases. They said the convoy would be undefended because all attention would be on Sandstone. They planned to ambush it. Kill everyone. Take the weapons and supplies. Sarah stood immediately and moved to the door. She knocked twice, the signal they'd arranged. The door opened and Colonel Price entered with Chief Kovacs right behind him. He needs to tell you what he just told me, Sarah said urgently. Right now. For the next 20 minutes, Khalid repeated everything. The conversation he'd overheard. The names he'd heard mentioned. The timeline as he understood it. Chief Kovacs asked sharp, probing questions. Khalid answered them all. His story remained consistent. When it was done, Colonel Price and Kovacs left the room quickly. Sarah could hear them in the hallway making urgent phone calls. She was alone with Khalid again. Thank you, she said quietly in Pashto. Will it help? Khalid asked. I think so. I think it might save lives. Khalid nodded slowly. Good. Why did you tell me? You could have stayed silent. Khalid looked at her with those tired, intelligent eyes. Because you were right. I am a teacher. I spent my life trying to help children learn and grow. I don't want death. I don't want violence, he paused. And because you treated me like a human being. That is a rare thing in this place. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. The door opened. Colonel Price gestured for her to step outside. In the hallway, the colonel's expression was transformed. He actually looked hopeful. We contacted Field Command. They knew about a weekly supply convoy but hadn't considered it a target. All their defensive focus was on Sandstone. They're scrambling air support and a security team to the convoy route right now. He paused. Captain, if this intelligence is accurate, you may have just saved a dozen lives. Maybe more. Sarah felt dizzy with relief. And Khalid, sir? He cooperated fully. I'll make sure it's noted in his file. I can't promise release, but I can promise he'll be treated fairly from now on. And I'll personally ensure his family is notified that he's alive and well. It was more than Sarah had expected. Over the next 6 hours, updates came in steadily. The convoy had been reinforced with additional security and air support. When it reached the mountain pass where Khalid's information suggested the ambush would occur, insurgents had indeed been waiting. But instead of finding an easy target, they'd found a prepared defensive force. The ambush was broken up with minimal casualties. 3 American soldiers were wounded, but none killed. The attackers scattered into the mountains. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was victory enough. When Sarah returned to Fort Davidson the following Monday, everything was different. Colonel Price called her into his office. This time Chief Kovacs was there too. Captain Chen, the colonel began. I owe you an apology. We all do. He gestured to Kovacs, who nodded stiffly. You saw something the rest of us missed. You understood that sometimes strength isn't about force. It's about connection, about humanity. Sir, I'm recommending you for a commendation, Colonel Price continued. Your actions directly led to intelligence that saved American lives. That's what this job is about. Chief Kovacs cleared his throat. Captain, I was wrong about you. I thought combat experience was the only thing that mattered. But you showed me that understanding people, really understanding them, that's its own kind of strength. He extended his hand. I hope you'll accept my apology. Sarah shook his hand, still processing everything. There's one more thing, Colonel Price said. He opened a folder on his desk and slid a document across to her. Effective immediately, you're being promoted to lead a new pilot program. Cultural liaison and strategic communication for detainee operations. You'll train other officers in your methods. This facility will become the model for a new approach. Sarah looked at the document, hardly able to believe what she was reading. And, Captain? The colonel's voice was warm now. For what it's worth, I learned something too. Combat badges and medals matter. But so does the courage to do the right thing when everyone else says you're wrong. You have that courage. That afternoon, Sarah did one final round through the detention wing. When she reached Khalid's cell, he was reading a book, something she'd arranged for him. Khalid, she said in Pashto. He looked up and stood respectfully. I wanted to tell you that your information was accurate. The convoy was saved. You helped save American lives. Khalid nodded slowly. I am glad. Death serves no one. I also wanted to tell you that I'm going to make sure you're treated with dignity while you're here, and I'm going to fight for your case to be reviewed properly. Thank you, Captain. Khalid paused. May I ask you something? Of course. Why do you do this? You could have left me in that cell. Let someone else handle it. Why did you risk your career for someone like me? Sarah thought about her answer carefully. Because I believe that even in war we don't have to lose our humanity, she said finally. I believe that seeing each other as people, as mothers and fathers and teachers and sons, that's not weakness. That's the only thing that will ever actually bring peace. Khalid smiled sadly. You give me hope, Captain. That is also a rare thing in this place. As Sarah walked out of Fort Davidson that evening, she felt different, lighter somehow. She had no combat badge, no deployment patches, no visible scars from battle. But she had something else. She had proven that the greatest strength isn't always found in weapons or force. Sometimes it's found in the quiet courage to see the humanity in everyone, even in your enemies, especially in your enemies. And that kind of strength, the strength to build bridges instead of walls, to choose connection over conflict, that was a victory worth more than any medal. The prisoners had trusted her when they trusted no one else, and in doing so they'd taught her something too. That respect and dignity aren't weaknesses to be exploited. They're the foundations on which real peace is built. One conversation at a time. One moment of humanity at a time. One brave choice at a time.